got the backdrop over here.
Oh, this is incredible. I feel like
Clapping?
I really do. I feel like I'm in Sound of Music.
Yo,
Right?
Did you do your frolic yet?
No, I should.
You got a frolic
I'm
there.
gonna go up there and spin around. And
I'll go with you. I'll get my swimsuit. We'll just like frolic around France together.
and then cut to Nina, Nina. 2 men were arrested for aberrant behavior.
That'll be a hell of a headline. That'll be one hell of a headline. Okay, so we're recording now. We're good to go.
Okay.
And hello, world. I'm super excited because you guys need to know this person right here because he's created some of like the most legendary pieces of work, animation, fiction, movies ever. Like he's pretty much the author of your childhood and you probably don't even know it unless you're in the know. This is Chris Sanders. We're talking the director, co-writer, co-director of movies like How to Train Your Dragon, Lilo and Stitch, Call of the Wild, and now the new freaking crap. I'm forgetting the name of the Wild Robot.
Yes.
The Wild Robot. Like you just have such a big filmography because I'm also trying to get into like your background as an animator, your background as a character designer, storyboard artist. You worked on Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, like Lion King. You even worked with Marvel Comics at one point. Is that correct?
My Marvel bit was actually my very, very first job, and it was the animated, I guess, arm of Marvel. And I worked on a show called Muppet Babies. That was my very first job.
I used to watch Muppet Babies so much.
Did you?
I did. I still have the theme song stuck in my head.
Now I'm hearing it. It's easy.
Babies
It's
are
catchy.
coming. It's so catchy that it's in my head almost 30 years later. So thank you for that. Now we have so much to get through in a like short amount of time because I really want to like talk about like your career and everything leading up to the Wild Robot because it's so fascinating. So obviously like once you like left college, you started working for Marvel, but then you started working at Disney as a storyboard artist, right?
I did.
Can you tell me like just some of those films that you worked on? Was it those bigger films first, or did you have to work your way up into becoming like a character designer?
I'll try to make this quick. I don't want to make this too long. The weird thing is because I came from television and I worked at Marvel, I saw storyboarding, but it was storyboarding for television, which is very different than storyboarding for features.
Okay.
So when I arrived at Disney, I was actually hired to be in the visual development department, and I was doing visual development on a film called Rescuers Down Under, and I was doing some imagery of like at the very beginning of the film, little mice send a signal from Australia to New York. And I literally thought, like, I don't know what time of day it would be if they sent a signal in the morning in Australia. Would it be nighttime or daytime in New York? So I went to the research library at Disney, and I was looking at a globe, and I couldn't help but notice all these different places between Australia and New York. And I came up with the idea of, well, maybe they bounce the signal from place to place.
Right.
And so I did these drawings of little mice that were like in a jungle, and they had like an old like airplane that had crashed, and they were using the radio, et cetera, et cetera. And the producer, I guess, on the Rescuers asked me if I wouldn't storyboard that sequence, and I immediately said, no, I can't storyboard. That's because I was thinking of the way they storyboard in TV, which again is very, very intense and very disciplined. Little tiny drawings on one page, and many of those a day.
Right.
And I declined, and he came back to me and he said, "Tell you what. Why don't you take those drawings you did of this mouse sending a signal in Australia and the arrival of the signal in New York and just do all the drawings that come between those?"
Okay.
And I said, well, I can do that. So I took these story pads and I started doing these drawings, and I found a piece of music actually which became a model for how I work. I found a piece of music that was very inspiring and it was exciting and noble, and I did all these drawings. And then he came back and he said, "Great, can you take these drawings and can you pin them to a storyboard?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I can do that." And I pinned them up. And then he said, "Would you be willing to take this stick and point at them and pitch this back to like all the story guys so they just understand what you did?"
Right.
And I said, "Well, I can do that." And so I did that. And then he said, "That was great. Can you do that for another part of the film?" And I said,
Right.
"Yeah, I can do that." And all of a sudden, like a month or so later, I realized, oh, I'm storyboarding. They tricked me. So that's how I started. They tricked me into storyboarding. So that's how I began my career, and I spent really, most of my time in the story department, which is I'm so grateful for because that I think led to a semi-successful career directing, because you're still, no matter what you're doing, directing or whatever you're doing, you're always in service to story.
Right.
So that training that I got, and I worked with Ed Gombert and Joe Ramft and some of the best story artists in the business, and not only like honed the craft of doing a story drawing, but the art of the art of developing a story.
Okay.
And how collaborative that is, and how important it is to push back and be willing to change things, etc. Did that answer the question?
That answered the question.
I know that was a big
deal.
so. I tried to do it fast. All right.
No, we got like a lot out of that. I'm really into it. This is great. now, in like service of like talking about like when you were starting out, like you started off in the 80s, and I was very fascinated to find out that one of the most iconic characters was born in your brain like in the 80s, way before you even premiered, and that's the character of Stitch. And from what I hear, Stitch started off as like a character that was supposed to appear in a storybook that you wanted to create, and the storybook didn't get picked up or something like that. Can you explain that just a little bit?
I didn't actually draw the book, but you're absolutely correct. I wanted to do a little story about this strange little creature. He was an anomaly. He was a monster, and it was a story all about this little creature that lived in a forest and had no idea what his origin was.
Right.
And as I drew the creature, and that's about as far as it went, because as I began to try to write the story, I really couldn't contain it to, say, 30 pages of a children's book. It seemed like it was just too big. So I just forgot about it, and I literally put it on a shelf, and it eventually got buried.
For almost 20 years.
Yeah, it was at least 14 or 15 years later that I was in the last days of working on Mulan, and Tom Schumacher, the head of feature animation, he was impressed enough by my work as head of story on Mulan, which I actually got a writing credit for, which was unusual. And he asked me if there was anything that I wanted to do next. And at first I said, I can't think of anything. And at that moment I remembered that character. And I thought, yeah, let me pitch something. So I went away and began work again on that character. And the odd thing was, in order to successfully transmit the story that was in my head to whoever was going to look at this in the development department, including Tom Schumacher, I thought I better draw it and as well as write it, because at the time there were a lot of alien movies, and they were always monsters, save for E.T. And I didn't want. If they were going to say no, I wanted them to say no to my idea and not to an idea that they were seeing in their heads that may have been different.
Of course.
So the odd thing is, I ended up completing that book in a way that I had intended to make so many years ago,
just in a feature film form.
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
That was the origin of Lilo and Stitch.
That is absolutely incredible. And like, I want to say, like, during the time of Lilo and Stitch, obviously Lilo and Stitch came out just when the Disney Renaissance kind of ended, like what we deem the Disney Renaissance. And, you know, Disney was going through kind of like this period that a lot of us call like the experimental Disney period, where you have movies like Chicken Little, you have movies like Treasure Planet, which is one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. But Lilo and Stitch, like, just transcended that whole period, became an iconic character in and of itself. I mean, we're at Annecy, the film festival for animated films right now, and I'm seeing people walk around with like Stitch memorabilia like everywhere, which has got to be wild for you that people are still loving it years and years later, right? But something very significant came out of that movie, and that was you worked on that movie with Dean DeBlois, right? And you eventually went from Disney to DreamWorks to direct and write with him How to Train Your Dragon.
Yes.
Right? And so there's a bunch of links here that I'm like, tie the strings together. Let's talk about
we could
this.
do one of those boards.
Do one of those boards. So you did the character design for not only Stitch, but also Toothless as well. Was that... I see similarities between those two characters, and I see people with like tattoos where the characters are kind of interacting. I don't know if you've seen those tattoos before, but it's really, really cool. Talk to me about kind of like creating the Toothless character after coming off of Lilo and Stitch, and was there like any like similarities between those two like character designs that you were like trying to put in there?
In Lilo and Stitch, that was an unusual situation where when Tom Schumacher agreed or decided that we were going to make the film, I remember the day he said, "I will make this movie on one condition, that it looked like you drew it," and that's a whole other story that we will now jump past.
Okay.
Toothless and How to Train Your Dragon is a really interesting story. Now, I did not directly draw him or design him, but he later on, the designer did confess that he's a big Stitch fan. And I do admit, I was the one that added those really big, giant plates that act as ears because it's such an effective way of transmitting an animal's attitude.
His expressions, attitudes,
emotion.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the Toothless on screen was something that we adapted, or I guess we changed the Toothless that was in the book in order to get the story working. The Toothless that is in the book is on screen in the finished film. In the original How to Train Your Dragon, there's a moment where Hiccup and Toothless are taking a break after going flying, and they're on a beach and they're relaxing, and these little dragons land and they're bothering them. That's the Toothless from the book. When I came onto the film, they were having issues with the story, and I was asked to come on and see if I could I guess get the story unstuck. And one of my very first calls was to Dean, who I had met on Mulan and partnered with very successfully on Lilo and Stitch. And I literally said, "What are you doing? Are you busy right now?" And he said, "Actually, I'm between things." And I said, "Well, do you want to come over here and co-direct and co-write again?" And he said, "Yes." When we looked at the story, and again, the book is an amazing, wonderful book by Cressida Cowell, but built into the story, and this is something that works in a book, but film is a very disciplined thing.
Right.
It's a very disciplined art form. You only have so much time, and you only have so much attention from the audience. And you've got to be very, very tight and sharp with the story in order for it to work. We looked at that story and we realized there was a bit of a short circuit in the story because Vikings were not only battling dragons, but there was also this and it was a very fun sequence that they boarded where the Vikings went and collected dragons' eggs. And there was a scene where they hatched the eggs and kind of like, it was like a Viking blind box. You didn't know what you were going to get. And understandably, this is one of those things I really learned through the process of working on How to Train Your Dragon. I learned something on every film I work on. And what we learned was that, what we realized was that was the short circuit. Like, it really needs to be one or the other. Dragons and Vikings need to either be in conflict or they are something that they have a bit of a symbiotic relationship with. So that's really where Toothless came from. We realized that the Toothless in the book, which is the little one, in a sense, needed to be supersized and turbocharged. Okay. Because of course we decided Vikings and dragons should be in conflict. That's conflict is an energy source in a story. So if Vikings and dragons are in conflict, then Toothless probably should be the most feared dragon in their realm. Right. And that's where the idea of the Night Fury came. The Night Fury came from. I remember actually sitting at the script and like, what am I going to call it? And I was like, maybe a Night Fury. And so we asked the crew to accept that pretty big change, and they were amazing in accepting the shift. So the dragon went from being that smaller dragon to being the Toothless that we know. And on top of it, when we were talking about how we would surface him, we thought, well, if he flies at night and he's pretty much black,
invisible,
then he's basically invisible. Right. I remember when we told that department that that we're going to make him black. I remember the look on their faces. There was a moment of silence. And both Dean and I were like, that's a problem, isn't it?
Is that
that's
a problem?
Big problem, yeah. Because if we actually make him black, he'll actually be invisible. So he's actually Toothless is a very, very, very dark gray that has a mottled. It's very subtle, but he has a mottled surface. Okay, yeah. So he's in a sense spotted, but it's very subtle.
Right. He's not like I'm bad with colors, but he's not like the matted black, right? Where it's just like pure darkness where but he does have like that layer where you could see like a reflection of the sun a little bit.
That's exactly it. They need to have some interaction with the light, and the lighting department needs an interaction in order to literally see him.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good idea though, because we were just, checking out the drone show that they had here at Annecy, and they show off all the iconic like DreamWorks characters. But the Toothless thing was very impressive because all they had to show was the eyes and like a little bit of his nostrils, and we knew exactly who it was because he's a Night Fury, he's black, it's nighttime, we're not going to see everything from him, so it matched the character perfectly. So even the drones understood what you were trying to do by making him like black and unseeable in the night. Absolutely insane. I really want to get into like your relationship with like Dean, because I feel like there's a lot of director-writer duos that like exist in Hollywood. Like you could talk about Phil Lord and Chris Miller. You could talk about the Coen brothers, the Wachowskis, you name it, the Russos. But you and Dean jumped from Disney to DreamWorks, and made two of some of the most iconic animated films ever. Can you talk to me about like your relationship with him? Like, are you best friends? Like, I know you said you called him up and you met on Mulan. Like, how did that relationship grow?
Yeah. Dean, actually, I was introduced to Dean. We met each other on Mulan, where I was the head of story, and he was in the layout department. But I immediately realized that he was good at storytelling, very good at storytelling, and I thought his drawings were perfect for the story department. So I don't remember the details of it, but I was an advocate for him making the jump from layout into story, which obviously was very successful. And I have to credit Dean with cracking the story for Mulan in that that was a monumental effort to really nail down the story, and that's a whole thing unto itself that we could do. But we were boarding and pitching sequences, and nothing was really sticking. And Dean, who was inspired by a sequence from the Dead Poets Society.
Oh, okay. Love that movie.
Yeah,
it's a great movie.
I actually I contributed in that I had a piece of music. It was a piece of music from a movie called Come See the Paradise, I believe.
Okay.
And it was a piece of music that was being used a lot, maybe almost overused in trailers.
Okay.
But it's a really powerful, driving, pounding piece of music because Dean said, I'm going to board the sequence where Mulan steals her father's sword and armor and rides out. And we didn't need any script because he was going to do it without dialogue. It was going to be pure pantomime.
Okay.
So he boarded that sequence. On screen, it's pretty much identical to the way he boarded it.
Wow.
And I remember the day that he put the board up. Back in the old day, we pushed the button on probably a DVD player, and we played the music, and he pitched the board. And it was the first sequence that was approved into production.
Wow, okay.
And that, I think, opened everything up, and everything flowed through there. So I would say at this point that the reason that we were able to successfully work together is that we have shared sensibilities, but we approach things differently.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect situation. If Dean was making a comedy and I was making a drama, there would be conflict and nothing would work. But we were always making the same movie. And he has, I think, the same quirky, offbeat sensibilities that I have.
I can attest to that, yeah.
Albeit a little bit different, right? So one of the things I think we really, enjoyed doing on How to Train Your Dragon and on Lilo and Stitch, after we had the movie outlined, we would divvy up the sequences. And he'd say, I want this sequence, and I'd say, I want this sequence. And I don't think we ever argued about which sequence we were going to get because I think
you get this one, I get this one, piece of the pie,
Yeah, we never grabbed the same one, right? And it was very successful because really, in a sense, I was the first person I was trying to impress with my pages was Dean.
Okay.
And I think he said the same thing to me, and I was at some point.
That's a good partnership right there.
Yeah, I mean, we literally at one point were sitting at the same table in his house, and we were at each end of the table writing, and we would talk to each other about the situations and keep writing. So we would divvy up sequences, we would write them individually, and then we would trade pages, and then we would give notes to each other about each other's pages. It was great. It was wonderful. So if you're going to work with somebody, find somebody who has similar sensibilities, but you don't have to agree about how you solve something.
Right.
I'm sure that if we reverse those sequences, How to Train Your Dragon would have a different look and feel. Well, not a different look and feel, but the words would be different.
Right.
But whatever we did, it all linked together.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I could really attest to you saying like you guys have the same sensibilities. The way you talk about just animation, the films that you made and the films that you're making, it's so much joy and so much passion that comes out of it. I actually had the privilege to meet Dean very recently, and he just has this boyish energy where he's like, oh, I want to talk about this, but I got to work on this thing because he's working on a live action How to Train Your Dragon. And so I was like, I can just tell you and Chris are like that. I can just tell. But even to that point, I think it's really great and kind of full circle that there is a live action How to Train Your Dragon being made currently right now, and there's also a live action Lilo and Stitch being made right now. Can you tell me a little bit of your thoughts on that live action Lilo and Stitch, just very, very quick, because I really want to get to the Wild Robot as well, but I'm just very curious your thoughts on the live action Lilo and Stitch.
It'll be quick because I'm not really too involved in the adaptation part of it. I'll be doing the voice.
Yes, returning as the voice.
Yeah, they found a director of their choice. I I was not a part of that. You know,
Right.
That's their deal.
Right.
And they, oddly enough, his name is Dean. So I don't know the details of how they're adapting things. I have seen some things,
Okay.
which are secret.
You don't have to. You can't say. You don't have to say it
I'll
right
not
now.
share them.
He'll tell me right after this when the cameras are off.
But yeah, I'm on some level, I'm as interested and curious to see how they solve certain issues
Right.
as anybody else. One of the things I like about what happened with Dean is, like, he was involved, obviously, heavily with the creation of the very first film, and I like that they turned to him to direct live action. There's no reason not to do that. He knows more about its DNA than anybody else.
He loves it, like absolutely loves that world, loves the world that he's built, and like, you know, with the helps of the books and everything.
Yeah.
And I remember he specifically told me, he said, when I found out that they were even looking into doing this, I called them up and said, I would like this, please. Like, let me give it a try. But I just think it's like very fitting that, you know, he's taking the helm of that live action series, and you're still the voice of Stitch, because it could have been, I guess, easy for someone to like cast a different Stitch voice, but to keep the spirit of the character with someone who knows that character inside and out, Chris,
Absolutely.
you're the right choice for that. So
I'm very, very grateful to the Lilo and Stitch Dean for reaching out to me and asked me if I wanted to do it. And we had a lovely conversation I think it was a conversation that may have been intended to be just a few minutes, but we ended up talking, I think, for hours actually. And I so enjoyed talking to him. I think he's a great person.
Right.
I think he's very clever and inventive, and it was just a great conversation. And again, I really am grateful that he reached out to me for that, because I think it just made sense. Like, I know how to do it. I still do the voice.
Yeah.
So, I'll still, yeah. In
has
fact,
anybody asked you to do the voice while you were here yet?
I did it spontaneously this morning at a panel.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, I can still do the voice, and I'm still just as naughty.
So yeah.
See, now
Yeah.
that's the clip right there. I can officially say that Stitch is on the podcast, guys. Welcome.
Yeah. You know, yeah.
You even got the voice. You even got the like. I can't even. I tried to do a Stitch voice. I grew up doing this myself ever since I saw the movie, and people always tell me that it's so good, but not as good as yours.
Oh, very nice, though. I think.
Thank you.
I think it's very nice.
Well, thank you very much.
I endorse your version. Yeah. Yeah.
Stitch endorses Stitch's version. Thank you very much. So moving on to The Wild Robot, your new film. Super excited about it. And I remember I was talking to Jerry during the junket for Kung Fu Panda 4, and he like looks me dead in my eyes and he says, like, Juju, we have this new movie coming out. I truly believe in this movie. This movie is going to knock your socks off. It's going to knock everyone's socks off. And as soon as he said that, I said, okay, I got to see this trailer. And I saw the trailer, immediately teared up. It's such, just from, I believe the trailer's maybe like a minute and a half or something like that. There's so much emotion. The animation is unique and illustrative, with a main character voiced by the wonderful Lupita Nyong'o. Like, just love her as an actress. There's just so many things working so well with this movie, and you got a standing ovation at the panel that I saw a couple days ago where you showed some exclusive footage. Just the reception of this film, it's a wonder to see. Like, can you tell me about like the journey it was saying, I want to do this movie based on this book? And what's it been like experiencing people's first reactions, like showing it here at Annecy for the first time?
It sounds kind of like a standard answer, but it is nonetheless true. We've been working on this so hard, and the entire crew has poured so much love into this project in a way that is hard to. I can't credit them enough for how much work they put into this, and just offering their genius and their artistry, and really believing in it. So this moment where we get to begin to share it, for me, is an absolute thrill, and it's also exciting and it's very moving and thrilling, because it looks very different than any other film we've ever done. Sometimes you talk about the look of a film because maybe it's not so strong story-wise. That couldn't be, I think, like further from the truth. I think Peter Brown's book, we worked very, very hard to translate it to the screen and do a good job keeping all its gifts and its magic and messages intact. But part of the success, I realized early on, would be based on how the film looked.
Right.
Because it's about a robot ROSM 7134, or ROS for short, a piece of high technology that is lost in a wilderness.
Right.
The contrast of Roz with her environment would be critical to the resonance of the story. So I was in the right place at the right time. DreamWorks had made huge advances in the visuals of their films with Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and with Bad Guys. I knew they could get an illustrated style onto the screen, but I was asking, how much further could we go?
Right.
And we were all in pursuit of one of my, Disney's earliest films, the environments in Bambi.
Okay.
These Tyra Swan-inspired visuals and environments that had the soft look that is irreplaceable. There's nothing about like the analog warmth that comes from a human hand doing a painting. And I would also cite Miyazaki and My Neighbor Totoro as environments. Just absolute magic, transportive, immersive, and so I set our course. We have our heading. I set our heading, and I set the goal, and I was frankly almost unnerved with how successful it was, because it was so. I don't want to say abstract, but it was so painterly and impressionistic. One of our earliest painters, Daniel, who was doing these studies that were very, very loose, and there's no replacement for the loose and the joyous effect that these paintings had.
Right.
I asked Ramon Zibak, our production designer, is it possible to make the finished look of the film be indiscernible from these paintings?
Right.
They frankly achieved it, and I knew that had happened. And this is one of the things I mentioned at the presentation when we were in Central Dailies, and we look at all sorts of things in Central Dailies, character designs, and we were looking at what I thought was one of those painterly sketches, and someone pushed a button and it began to move, and the character that was part of it started moving through it.
Yeah.
And I realized that they had done it. And at that point, I think there was a moment of panic. Should I have asked them to go this far? Because is it too abstract? Is it going to be distracting in some way? But it couldn't have been further from the truth. The resonance that we got emotionally and the way that the audience is involved in this film is like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And it was a critical part of getting this book successfully translated to the screen.
Yeah. See, this is incredible because so the story is about a robot by the name of Roz who gets not sent to this island, but she crash lands on this island because of doohickeys with the delivery system. Like, I don't want to spoil anything, but she's looking for a task, and the task that she ends up finding is this baby duck, right? And she ends up taking on this role of like motherhood and teaching this duck to survive. And I was very impressed by how mature this movie is, just like off rip, because it's very dark in a way of like how everything kicks off, but it's like a story of like found family and survival. And you don't skip out on the survival bit. Like, this is a harsh landscape that is not only hard for the baby duck, but also hard on Roz herself.
Yeah.
So what's it like in a quote unquote a children's film, like making those narratives and making those themes and making it something that could be like scary and hard to kind of like absorb, but do it in a way that like anyone can absorb?
I think you almost answered the question perfectly by saying that you can tell any story. You just have to be conscious of who your audience is. And this book had some themes that were deceptively, I think, I don't want to say simple, but they were deceptively inviting. But they resonate like nothing I've ever worked on before.
Right.
There are several things in the movie that we were, I think, attracted us, but also like I guess kind of grabbed us emotionally. We had a conversation with Peter Brown, the author, very early on, and he told us something that became a guiding principle. While he was writing the book, he said he had in mind the theme and the idea that kindness could be a survival skill.
Yes,
and
I love that so much.
that became a guiding principle. And as a screenwriter, I was able to memorialize that on screen. And so Roz, the robot, arrives on this island with a set of programs in her. She's pre-programmed. But the animals that she's encountering are also pre-programmed. They're programmed to survive.
Right.
They are in a situation where you win or you don't see the next day.
Right.
So there's an uncompromising nature to where she is. So there's all sorts of themes and things that evolve in the story that are just, they're so universal. And like the best Disney films, like Dumbo, that I fell in love with and still love, this I think had an equal magnitude of honesty, and it was a very gutsy story. It's a story about life and love and loss in some cases, and it doesn't shy away from them. It doesn't shy away in the book, and we didn't shy away from it either. And I think the very best animated films have all of those elements. So it's a beloved book, and hopefully, we got it, to the screen, intact.
I mean, you got it. I mean, one of my favorite moments, and as a parent, I have a 6-year-old daughter. So as a parent, like seeing them, like in the trailer, the scene where she's watching him fly and she's like reaching out to him from the tree, it just hit me like right here, because I just know. And you said this, you guys all said this during the presentation, like reaching that moment of like catharsis, of like knowing what they've been through to kind of get to that moment. It just came together so beautifully, and I'm really excited to like see the whole thing play out. Like, I'm sure you're excited to see everybody like experience this movie. It's like truly awesome.
Absolutely, and I'm not spoiling the movie. This is not the entire story, because
it's in the trailer.
There's much more than this. But it's one of the things that really attracted me to the character in the story, that adopting a baby. Roz doesn't even know what a baby bird is. Yeah. She doesn't even. It's not in her programming. She's like, "What is this?" So she's going to have to learn from scratch. So in a sense, she's a first-time parent. Like, I've decided I've changed my mind. I don't want to do this. So she doesn't have programming for this. But in raising this gosling, she doesn't realize that should she be successful, and a Rosm always completes its task. If she's successful, she's heading towards an emotional moment where she's going to have to see this little gosling fly away. And anybody who's built a snowman and gets attached to it has gone through the same situation.
Gotta watch it melt. It's gotta melt at some point.
Yeah, and that is not the whole story, so don't worry. There's much more than that. That's one of the things I loved about the movie. There's just a lot of honesty in it, and powerful stuff, and sweet stuff, and funny stuff, and it's
great. One last question I gotta ask you about this movie is Roz's design. Right, like I made multiple TikToks talking about this movie, and like just showing trailers and things of that sort. And Roz, one, reminds me of one of my favorite robot characters in movies ever, the Iron Giant. And I also saw, what's his name from Star Wars, K2SO as well is a reference point. But then one of the biggest ones, and you talk about like Studio Ghibli and like My Neighbor Totoro being like inspiration for a lot of the production design, but also Laputa, the castle in the sky. She looks a lot like the robot as well there. Like, talk to me about like Roz's design and like finding those influences to kind of like create something unique and original out of her.
The robot in Peter Brown's book is both very specific but also very graphic. It is his style to be very graphic. So we knew that she had a certain silhouette that we wanted to be true to. And one of the things that Peter informed us about is that a Rosm robot is designed to live in a human world and work alongside humans.
Right.
That's why it's humanoid.
Very humanoid, yeah.
Exactly. It could work in a house, or it could work on a farm. So it works in a human space. But we were left with filling in the details.
Okay.
And also, Margie, the head of the studio, really, she's like, I challenge you to create a robot that is unique and memorable and iconic. And I was one of the first people to start drawing it, and I'm proud to say that my designs weren't used.
What? I was about to give you credit there. I was like, it was used.
No,
they weren't.
No, I did some exploration, and it just was. I think it was too busy. And one of our artists named Hyun one day came in and said, "I have something to show you," and he presented pretty much the Rosm you see.
Right.
And it was such a clean design, but it was really, really, I think, compelling.
Yeah.
It was a clean design. It was compelling. And one of the only directives that I insisted on is that she not have a mouth.
Yeah.
The robot in Iron Giant, I would credit with being one of the very few robots, if not the only one that I can think of, that has articulation in its face that works beautifully.
Right.
All the other robots that I find iconic and memorable and endearing, R2-D2, C-3PO, they have
Very
little to
blank
no
expression, no mouths, just
Yeah.
just beep boops in the eyes and things of that sort.
Absolutely. We as human beings will ascribe personality and character to things that are not alive. And that lack of articulation on her face, I think, gave us a character that people project their emotions
Right.
and their feelings onto. It was also a limitation that I think was good for our animators. It then fell to the animators, their movement, the movement on our eyes, and Lupita, who that would be a whole another hour I could easily talk about. I cannot say enough about how she took the lead in the creation of this amazing character. We left those recording sessions with just her voice. So she poured a huge amount of invention and thought, and she would redo things as we all learned together about this character. So it fell upon her and the animators to bring that character to life. So that's why Roz is lacking a mouth and lacking articulation on her face, but it's also because of Hyun why she's so beautiful. And credit, of course, to Peter Brown for the designs and the silhouette from the book.
Yeah, incredible. All right, so we're reaching the end of this episode, but this is called Get Wrecked. And what I love to do, the whole reason why I started this whole thing in the first place, is because I like to know what films change the brain chemistries of the people that like I admire, right? So I usually ask people for 1 film to 4. So if you have those 1 to 4 films that's changed your brain chemistry and kind of created the Chris Sanders that we know today, what would those 4 films be?
In the animated realm, it's a kind of a tie between Dumbo and My Neighbor Totoro.
Oh, okay.
I'm cheating. I'm making those 1.
I think people will mind. It'll be fine.
Obviously, for the offbeat and incredible charm and honesty that the stories possess, and the incredible invention of the characters. In the live action realm, I'd say Ghostbusters and Back to the Future.
Okay.
Are 2 films
those
that
are good ones.
The stories I think are better than they needed to be successful.
They had no business being that dang good.
They never stopped delivering. From the first frame to the last, the story kept delivering, and that is something that I aspire to. And I remember leaving the theater thinking, I didn't pay enough to see these. I should go back in and just give them more money. I didn't give you enough. The next one is kind of hard to talk about because it's something I learned a lot about story from. And we're going to hold it together. There's a film called Throw Mama from the Train with starring Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal, and it is a really funny, weird story. Billy Crystal and
the title alone, I was like, what?
Have you ever seen it?
Never seen it.
Billy Crystal and I'm not going to get into the details. Suffice it to say, Billy Crystal finds himself in a situation where he's kind of trapped in Danny DeVito's house. Danny DeVito's mother is a singularly incredible character, and this actress's, and I wish I had her name off the top of my head. It was her final film, and she's this force of nature. She's a force of nature.
That's a way to put it.
At one point, it looks as though like Billy Crystal has been killed in a calamity inside the house, and Danny DeVito's all upset. Danny DeVito is her son, and he's all upset, and he's like, my friend, and she comes up and goes, my friend, you little crybaby, go bury him in the yard before he stinks up the place. And she's just unrelenting. And so the Danny DeVito character is really charming, but there's a moment that I learned a lot about filmmaking and character from that I never forgot. Because Billy Crystal, he's trapped in a situation with this character that, he's not really annoying, but he's annoying to Billy Crystal. There's things about him that are just, really...
He's annoying, but they're friends.
He's
like,
kind
we
of
all have
nutty.
that annoying friends, yeah.
Yeah, and he's trapped with him. And Billy Crystal is spending time... Anyway, Danny DeVito says, I have a coin collection. And he says, do you want to see it? And Billy Crystal's like, yeah, fine,
Sure.
whatever. And he takes out this little box and he pulls these coins out and he sets them down. And he says, this, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but take it for what it is. He says, this is a quarter. And he slides it over and he says, and this is a dime. And he slides it over and he goes, and this is another dime. And And Billy Crystal says something along the lines of, "This isn't a coin collection. These are
It's regular coins.
These are worthless." And he says, "Oh, but they're not." And then I can't talk about it. He says, "I got this dime." He tells a story about where the dime came from.
Okay.
And his dad gave it to him as change when they went to the fair when he was a kid. Oh, and it broke my heart. And it taught me something about, sorry.
No, it's okay. I love this.
It taught me something about storytelling, and that Danny DeVito, he was in a way two-dimensional until that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then he revealed something about his past and who he was that you fell in love with him. And it was genius, I thought. Anyway, it's something that I keep in mind all the time when I'm writing and working on a film. I kept it in mind when I was working some of the characters in The Wild Robot. Okay.
Wow.
Sorry. Anyway.
No, this is exactly why we do this, because I feel like film as a medium, it builds who we are, especially like us as creatives. It teaches us like not only like how to live, but they teach us lessons. And that's why I say like the movies that change your brain chemistry, because like movies like that for me are like Spider-Man 2, right? I feel that way just talking about Spider-Man 2. Like I remember seeing that when I was 12 years old, right? And like I get the same emotions just like talking about those type of things. And it in a way informs a lot of things of what I do. And so like hearing that from you, like not only did I learn a lot about you in this moment, but like learning like where the Wild Robot's heart comes from, learning where Lilo's and Stitch's heart comes from, How to Train Your Dragon, and it makes a lot of sense. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that. And I'm definitely going to watch this movie now. I have to.
It's a fun movie. It's a fun
And he
movie.
says crying. It's a fun movie.
It is. It's a great movie. I love it.
It's incredible. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me and
thank
talking all things Wild Robot, your career. It's honest. This is like a dream come true. Like you're a legend in this game. You've made so many incredible things, and you did it with such honesty and heart and passion. And I hope anybody watching this, animators, I know you've met a lot here this week, can just watch this and just kind of like, be inspired. Like, I have no doubt they will be.
Thank you so much. It was a great interview.
Oh, it's incredible,
Well
man.
done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We can cut it before we both start crying.
I know, right?